day to you, and welcome back to the Higher Grounds podcast. Thank you for dropping in on us today. Hope that you're doing well. Hope that the Lord's blessing you in your particular field of service and asking the Lord to bless you and your family. I'm glad to have the opportunity to just step into your life for 30 minutes and have a cup of coffee and just enjoy talking to you for a little bit. Hey, over the last couple of weeks, we have been dealing with the subject of why I, Andy Wells, left politics. 2 weeks ago, we talked about the We Stand With God rallies and how that Brother Chad Watson, Brother Stephen Williamson, and myself started the We Stand With God family rallies back in 2015, and how that we began to travel the country, and it was during an election season, so it hit at the right time. And our message resonated with a lot of people coming on the heels of the Supreme Court's decision on same-sex marriage. And the Lord allowed us to travel quite a bit in regard to that particular matter of family values. Then, of course, we began to travel with some political folks and travel around the country and see a few things. The Lord allowed us to be in some gatherings with some very unique people, former governors, presidential candidates, and the like. On top of that, I remember going to Ferris Wilks's home outside of Dallas. He's a billionaire, and this was a meeting of religious leaders to engage them in the political process. I remember I had supper at this nice place. There were the likes of Tony Perkins there, Max Lucado, even Kenneth Copeland was there, and John Hagee and others were there, heavy hitters in the popular religious world. Most of them from Texas, beings as that we were in Texas for that meeting. So I've had the opportunity to travel and see a lot of things and be involved, and then after a while, I began to have my eyes opened as to the things that were going on behind the scenes. And if you'll remember, one of the statements that I made, which could be viewed as kind of a vitriol in some way, it wasn't meant to be so, was the fact that how that the Democratic Party treats our precious black communities in each state and in each community is the same way that the Republican Party is treating those that are conservative in religious circles, and we're being treated in such a manner as to patronize us to receive our vote, while at the same time not believing or caring about us in any like. And so all of that in consideration, these things began to manifest themselves to me in a grand way. After the last week we talked about, after that the primary was over with, and Donald Trump had won the primary for the Republican nomination, and he was the nominee. How that I had called one of the individuals we were working with politically. I had called them and said, "Listen, I'm done. I'm out." The Constitutionalist Party represents more of who and what I am, and I think I'm just going to throw any weight I have that direction. To which he told me that it was a waste, and that no third party candidate will ever be elected, and that I just needed to come affect change within inside the Republican Party, and I took him up on that. Now, one of the things that we find that's tossed around often in regard to our vote, this either is on a state level or a national level. Most of the time, you'll hear this little statement made quite often. well, I'm voting for the lesser of two evils. Have you ever heard that statement made? I'm voting for the lesser of two evils. Well, that may be so, the lesser of two evils. But the lesser of two evils is still evil. And so I would just rather not do that personally at this juncture in my life. So if I'm going to use this, this analogy of the lesser of two evils, let me ask you if this would be viewed the same way by my wife. Let's say that I came up to my wife and I said, well, honey, I want you to know that I have been unfaithful to you, but I want you to know that I was unfaithful with a woman. I wasn't unfaithful with a man, because that's the lesser of two evils. Would you believe that she would be accepting of that? Well, absolutely not. And so I have really narrowed my view on that statement. One of the statements also that we're going to hear within the next several months is this. This is the most important election in your lifetime. Can you remember an election when that wasn't stated? Every election that I can remember from the first time that Bill Clinton ran back in the 90s has been the most important election in my lifetime. So this is something that's going to be thrown at us to make us feel guilty about, quote unquote, wasting our vote. I'm just speaking from how I feel. I understand if you feel differently. I get it. I gravitate toward how you feel, and I understand it because I was there at one time. So I'm not denigrating anyone in regard to if their view is not exactly like mine in regard to this subject, then you're an idiot. That is absolutely not what I feel. I understand why you feel the way you feel. I understand why you feel you need to vote for Mr. Trump if he were the nominee. I get that. I understand it. I'm speaking from the fact that I have been on the inside and have seen from a personal view of what takes place on the inside, which is what changed me forever and ever. I had a friend of mine who is still involved in the political process call me, and he said, I wish you would change your mind. I said, there is no changing my mind when it comes to this. I have been burned, and I have seen what has happened in my own life and on my own watch, and I'm done with it. And I have become a conspiracy theorist in regard to it, and we'll get into that a little bit further on today's episode, and this will be the last in these episodes on why I left politics. As I have followed elections, been involved in elections, I had a personal friend who ran for a particular office. When he ran for that particular office, he was not allowed to run. He won by a handful of 100 votes, and he was not his election wasn't certified, and he was not allowed to run. He was allowed to run again in a special election, but he had gotten sick, and there's some questions in my own heart and mind about him getting sick. He was not allowed. He was not able to run, and the Republican Party chose a candidate that I felt had absolutely no way of winning. When I began to investigate his campaign, I found out that he was not campaigning. This man was not going to the places that he needed to go to or doing the things that he needed to do to be elected. He was just not giving his best when it come to the campaign trail. However, when I sat down with a man who is extremely politically connected in this city, we sat at lunch one day in a barbecue place, and we talked over this situation in regard to how this was going. And I said, well, this will be the first time in history that this particular district in the Carolinas will be turned over to a Democrat who has run a valiant race. And he said, well, it sure looks like it. But on the night of the election, and when the results came in, the Republican who had not campaigned, who had not done his best, who had not gone to where he was told to go to campaign, won the election by over 1,000 votes in that district. Now, I said immediately, my very first statement that I made on the next day when my friend called me about the election was, I said this: election fraud. And not a Democrat, but Republican election fraud. That was my view and my view alone. This man, there's no way he could have won that election running the way he ran, not campaigning the way he should have campaigned against a person who ran a valiant race on the other side. So I believe that when it comes to fraudulent elections, we're not even talking about the presidential election. I don't want to talk about that. And people can say whatever they want to say, but the bottom line is there have been tampered with elections in small ways on local levels and larger levels for an awfully long time. So this was nothing new when folks began to balk about it way back in the when. Now, let's consider further some things that led me in the direction that I now am in. So when I made a commitment to go ahead and get involved locally, I started attending our local Republican Party meetings, and it wasn't long until I was voted in as the chairman of the Republican Party in our particular county. So when I was voted into that particular position, we began to, do things in regard to building the party and whatnot. And there was of course a turn that was being made on the political landscape in regard to more conservative candidates, quote unquote. And it was, of course, the election where Mr. Trump won the first presidency right after that. So when I was involved in the midterm election, there was an attorney general that was running for re-election. Now, when I took over the party and began to look at some things, one of the things that was of concern was some election fraud that was going on in our particular community. Now, this election fraud had nothing to do with one party against another. It had to do with connected candidates. So there were people that were in both parties who were adversely affected by the fraud in this particular county. Now, let me just give you some fraudulent things that were taking place. Now, nothing on a grand scale like you might think, but people who were not registered to vote in a particular voting district were allowed to vote in that voting district, though they were not registered to vote there. On top of that, there were people that were allowed to come vote at times when the election office was closed, but they were allowed to come in and vote even though it wasn't open for everyone to come. For instance, there was a representative in the state who, in running for his office, re-election, he had a big barbecue supper or some kind of supper that they made for a lot of people to come. And as these people came to the supper, there were vans and vehicles that were lined up to, as soon as these individuals got their supper and ate, they would load up on these vehicles and go to the election commission office, and they would be issued in and ushered in, and they would be issued the right to vote in the election without the other side, without the other party knowing that this was going on. And that is completely illegal and completely against the law, but yet it was going on and had gone on for a long period of time. So all of that information had been compiled into a dossier, and this dossier was taken by members of our party, and this dossier was placed before the Attorney General, and nothing ever came of it. This dates back prior to Trump. This dated back to the 2012 elections, and probably further than that. I don't have record of it, but probably further than that. So when I became the chairman and I learned all of these things and realized the things that were going on and the information that we held and had, and it was proof positive, there was nothing we could do with it. It had already been reported, so I just kind of sat back on it. So one day my phone rang, and the Attorney General's secretary said, we would like the Attorney General to come by, your county party meeting, and we would like for the Attorney General to speak on behalf of his reelection bid. To which I told the secretary, listen, we could care less whether or not the Attorney General is reelected to office. I don't care whether he's reelected. Matter of fact, I hope somebody else gets it. So he's wasting his time coming to this party meeting and speaking. And I hung up the phone. About 30 minutes after that, my phone rang with a number that I was unfamiliar with, and I just kind of got the idea. I knew who this would be. So I answered it, and it was the Attorney General, and he introduced himself, and I introduced myself. And he said, so what have I done to you? And I said, nothing. You've done absolutely nothing. I mean, that's what you've done. It's nothing. And he said, what's this about? I said, well, it's about election fraud. He said, what do you mean election fraud? I said, sir, we've had election fraud, as minor as it may seem. It's still illegal and punishable by prison time, according to the law books of the state. I said, and we've got evidence and proof of it, and nothing's been done about it. He said, well, I don't know anything about this. I said, well, that's interesting, because our people came to you a handful of years ago, sat in front of your desk in your office, delivered to you all of the information, and you said something would be done about it and someone would get back to them, and nothing has been done. Absolutely nothing. So we don't care if you're reelected or not. To which the Attorney General said, well, what do you want me to do about it? I said, well, reopen the investigation. He said, I'll do that. I'll reopen the investigation. I said, well, we'll see, I guess. And I hung up the phone. The next day, I was called by the authorities, and they began the investigation process to try to find out, and see what was going on. And so we delivered the information to them, and here's how that took place. He said, well, can you get interviews together? I said, I will set up interviews with all of the parties involved. I'll get a venue for you to sit down. So there were 3 investigators brought from the state. They sat down with these individuals who were privy to all the information about the fraud. Not all of them were Republicans, and not all of them were Democrats. There was a mix of Republicans and Democrat. And so they gave their information. The investigators said, we will be getting back in touch with you. And at that time, while the election season was still going for the Attorney General, he would call me about every week or text me every week, and we were chatty back and forth. And then as soon as the election was over, my phone never rang again. My text never went off again. And as soon as the Attorney General won his bid for re-election, we never heard not one word ever again from the authorities about this information. Not even we've looked at your material and there's not enough material here for us to go forward. Not one word was said positively or negatively. It just vanished and it just disappeared. When that took place, that was pretty much the straw that broke the camel's back for me. You have all of this going on in a very underhanded way, and it's not just the bleeding heart, left-leaning liberals. It's also the right-wing conservative Republicans. They're all in this for their own good, and there are things that go on both sides of the aisle, regardless of the color of the jacket, that are disingenuous. That's the best word that I can choose. They're disingenuous, and this disingenuousness has disenfranchised me with the process, and I'm no longer involved. I was approached by a law enforcement person in another state, and they were talking to me about an attorney that I had become acquainted with by way of name, reputation, and accusation. And the accusation of this attorney was the fact that the attorney had been accused on multiple occasions of molesting young children. And as this attorney had been accused of this, investigations had been opened on more than one occasion, and the investigations were quashed within a short amount of time. Now, when I began to dig deeper into this with this particular law enforcement personnel that I was interviewing or talking to, I said, why is nothing being done about this? To which he said, political connections. This particular individual, an attorney, very, very prosperous attorney in another state, is connected politically all the way to Washington, D.C., and he has been left alone, in our opinion, mine and other people's opinion, because of his affiliations and his connections, roommates with a current sitting governor in a particular state. And just, I mean, these things are very, I would say that this story can be played out over and over again. The ability for people to do wrong and get by once they're politically connected is an unbelievable thing. When you just give you one thing to consider as I start closing this thing down, when you take let's take, and I'm going to give you a statement that's going to surprise you, okay? People like Nancy Pelosi, Mitch McConnell, those types of individuals, Chuck Schumer, individuals who are the elitist in politics. They've been there for a long time. They know the ins and the outs. They're on the committees. They know the deep and dark secrets, and they've been in politics all these years. There's two things to be observed about these people. Number one, they're going nowhere. You're spitting in the wind to run against these people, whether they're conservative or liberal. You're spitting in the wind to run against them. They'll never be defeated. This is my opinion. The reason they'll never be defeated is this. These individuals have been made privy to the secrets of our nation. Each nation has secrets that need to be held close to the vest. And there are things that cannot be talked about with the public. And these individuals who know these secrets, we cannot afford to have them wandering the streets loose, if you will, without the protection of our nation because of them being scooped up and these secrets extracted from them. And so they're going to remain in office until they die. Now, not only that, but let's just consider let's consider some of these individuals in politics. Let's consider Nancy Pelosi. I want you to do the math yourself. I want you to go calculate Nancy Pelosi's salary from all of her years serving in Washington. Calculate it and give me the figure, the total of what she's earned. Then go look up what her genuine net worth is, and you're going to find out that her net worth is far above, exceeding the salary that she has gained by serving in public office. Now, there is a reason for that, and it's not what you want to hear, but the power has gained some things for them. A particular man that we've had on this podcast in years gone by made this statement to me. He said, I was in Washington, and I was going office to office talking to people about how could I pray for them? And Bobby said, I went into this particular office and the lady was talking to him about her job. She said, my job is to school these freshman politicians on, how to go about their business as a politician. Secondly, she said to Bobby, she said, what I have found is that most of them are idealists when they come up here to begin with. They're good people. They believe that they can make a difference. She said, and they leave my office still feeling that way, whether they're liberal or Democrat, they're idealist and believe they can make a difference. She said when they go across the hall and see the next lady in the next office, and she informs them how much they can receive legally from lobbyists, she said they leave that office a different person. That tells us a little bit about how broken our process genuinely is. This entire series is about why I left politics. I have been so disenfranchised by the way things are handled and by the way things go. I've been so disenfranchised that I want nothing to do with the process going forward. Someone said, you're not going to vote? Oh, yes, I will go vote. I'm going to go to the voting booth, and I'm going to go in the voting box. I'm going to register my votes, and I'm going to record my votes. And I don't mind telling you that many of the places where someone is running for office, a write-in candidate by the name of Andy Wells will appear on the ballot. Somebody said, well, you're wasting your vote. I am voting, but I am not going to vote for the lesser of two evils. Listen, I know that these 3 episodes have been heavy. I know that they have been difficult, and I know there's something no one wants to hear. But I wanted to give you my story and the things that I have seen down through the years. You do with them whatever you want. I'm not going to fall out with you one way or the other. Hey, thank you for coming by these 3 weeks, and I pray God's blessings upon your life. You, friend, keep pressing on the upward way, and we'll see you next week.